Hi. Today I am starting a book review series called Little Tiny Library Book Review. And I'm going to be reviewing some books that I find in little tiny libraries around my neighborhood or anywhere else. Because I just, will find these random books in the neighborhood. If you guys have ever seen those little tiny libraries, usually people have them outside of their houses or sometimes actual libraries or buildings. And it's just like a little box with a door in it, and people leave books there. You can take books. Yeah, and I've known about them for many, many years. And the past few years, most of the books I've been reading have been coming from these little tiny libraries. Occasionally I'll get a book from a bookstore, from the library, if I really want to read one. But I've just been finding these really great books in these little tiny libraries, and I just want to share them. So today's book that I'm going to be reviewing is called When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. There he is. And yeah, pour yourself a cup of coffee or tea. I'm trying to drink less coffee, but I just want a little iced coffee with my water before we get started. So, a little half and half. So, I know they say don't judge a book by its cover, but we all judge books by the cover, right? I mean, we just all do. Like, I will see a book and, how else are you supposed to know if you're supposed to be interested in it or not? I mean, sometimes I'll take a chance. I'm like, okay, I'll just try reading this and we'll see. But, I generally kind of know what kind of books I'll like. Sometimes I'm surprised. Sometimes I like to push myself out of my comfort zone. Generally speaking, I do like to read nonfiction books, and my most favorite is autobiographies. I love autobiographies. I love to hear about people's stories and human life and just the stories of people's lives and things they've experienced and where people come from. And I think if you talk to any random person on the street, generally speaking, people have a really interesting story to tell and really interesting things about their lives to share. And so I like autobiographies. I also like autobiographies of lesser known people, because it just goes to show you can just see a random person on the street and you have no idea what kind of life they're living. And so what drew me to this book was I was like, it was a biography, an autobiography, essentially. It was written by this man who his job was a neurosurgeon, so he spent, most of his adulthood going to medical school and then medical residency and working as a surgeon. And he gets diagnosed with cancer, with a very aggressive form of lung cancer in his mid-30s. And so this book is from his perspective, working as a surgeon, neurosurgeon of all professions, very much in the medical system and going from doctor to patient. And he's someone who's very, very passionate about his job, it was more than just a job for him. It was really like an identity for him, the biggest part of his identity, probably. And he has this huge crisis, not only grappling with the fact that he might die from this cancer, but also this part of him being kind of taken away, or his identity being switched from doctor and surgeon to patient. And now he's, going to see all these doctors and these specialists, and it's just a really interesting dichotomy, I guess you could say. So I just like to read a little excerpt, and I don't know, maybe in this book review I might have some spoilers, just FYI, in case anyone hasn't read it. But I just want to read an excerpt because this book is really, really, the writing, I mean, he's an incredibly talented writer, and he actually spent a lot of time when he was younger. Is my husband home? I don't know. When he was younger, studying books and poetry and literature and writing was one of his passions. So I'm just going to read the prologue. Okay. I flipped through the CT scans, the diagnosis obvious. The lungs were matted with innumerable tumors, the spine deformed, a full lobe of the liver obliterated, cancer widely disseminated. I was a neurosurgical resident entering my final year of training. Over the last 6 years, I had examined scores of such scans on the off chance that some procedure might benefit the patient. But this scan was different. It was my own. I wasn't in the radiology suite wearing my scrubs and white coat. I was dressed in a patient's gown, tethered to an IV pole using the computer the nurse had left in my hospital room with my wife, Lucy, an internist, at my side. I went through each sequence again. The lung window, the bone window, the liver window, scrolling from top to bottom, then left to right, then front to back, just as I had been trained to do, as if I might find something that would change the diagnosis. We lay together in the hospital bed. Lucy, quietly, as if reading from a script, "Do you think there's any possibility that it's something else?" "No," I said. We held each other tightly, like young lovers. In the past year, we'd both suspected, but refused to believe or even discuss that a cancer was growing inside me. About 6 months before, I had started losing weight and having ferocious back pain. When I dressed in the morning, my belt cinched 1, then 2 notches tighter. I went to see my primary care doctor, an old classmate from Stanford. Her sister had died suddenly as a neurosurgery intern after contracting a virulent infection, and so she'd taken a maternal watch on my health. When I arrived, however, I found a different doctor in her office. My classmate was on maternity leave. Dressed in a thin blue gown on a cold examining table, I described the symptoms to her. Of course, I said, if this were a board's exam question, 35-year-old with unexplained weight loss and new onset back pain, the obvious answer would be C, cancer. But maybe it's just that I'm working too hard. I don't know. I'd like to get an MRI to be sure. I think we should get x-rays first, she said. MRIs for back pain are expensive, and unnecessary imaging had lately become a major national point of cost-saving emphasis. But the value of a scan also depends on what you're looking for. X-rays are largely useless for cancer. Still, for many docs, ordering an MRI at this early stage is apostasy, she continued. X-rays aren't perfectly sensitive, but it makes sense to start there. How about we get a flexion extension x-rays then? Maybe the more realistic diagnosis here is an isthmic lots of medical words I don't know how to pronounce. Isthmic spondylolisthesis. You can tell I'm not a doctor. From the reflection on the wall mirror, I could see her Googling it. It's a pars fracture affecting up to 5% of people and a frequent cause of back pain in the young. Okay, I'll order them then. Thanks, I said. Why was I so authoritative in a surgeon's coat but so meek in a patient's gown? The truth was, I knew more about back pain than she did. Half of my training as a neurosurgeon had involved disorders of the spine. But maybe a spondy was more likely. It did affect a significant percent of young adults, and a cancer in the spine in your 30s? The odds of that couldn't be more than 1 in 10,000. Even if it were 100 times more common than that, it'd still be less common than a spondy. Maybe I was just freaking myself out. My son woke up. 1 second. All right. Sorry about that. Recording this while my baby's taking a nap. Alright, I'm just going to finish reading this excerpt because I really think this excerpt shows how he goes from like feeling on top of the world, like being in one of the most competitive like residencies, like starting his career. He has hope for himself, everyone has hope for himself, to going to like super, super low because he's been diagnosed with cancer and he has to grapple with now becoming a patient and also the fact that he might die. Okay, the x-rays looked fine. We chalked the symptoms up to hard work and an aging body, scheduled a follow-up appointment, and I went back to finish my last case of the day. The weight loss slowed and the back pain became tolerable. A healthy dose of ibuprofen got me through the day, and after all, there weren't that many of these grueling 14-hour days left. My journey from medical student to professor of neurosurgery was almost complete. After 10 years of relentless training, I was determined to persevere for the next 15 months until residency ended. I had earned the respect of my seniors, won prestigious national awards, and was fielding job offers from several major universities. My program director at Stanford had recently sat me down and said, "Paul, I think you'll be the #1 candidate for any job you apply for. Just an FYI, we'll be starting a faculty search for someone like you here. No promises, of course, but it's something you should consider." At age 36, I had reached the mountaintop. I could see the promised land, from Gilead to Jericho to the Mediterranean Sea. I could see a nice catamaran on that sea that Lucy, our hypothetical children, and I would take out on weekends. I could see the tension in my back unwinding as my work schedule eased and life became more manageable. I could see myself finally becoming the husband I'd promised to be. Then, a few weeks later, I began having bouts of severe chest pain. Had I bumped into something at work, cracked a rib somehow? Some nights I'd wake up on soaked sheets, dripping sweat. My weight began dropping again, more rapidly now, from 175 to 145 pounds. I developed a persistent cough. Little doubt remained. One Saturday afternoon, Lucy and I were lying in the sun in Dolores Park in San Francisco, waiting to meet her sister. She glimpsed my phone screen, which displayed medical database search results, frequency of cancer in 30 to 40-year-olds. "What?" she said. "I didn't realize you were actually worried about this." I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. "Do you want me to tell you about it?" she asked. "Or do you want to tell me about it?" she asked. Yeah. She was upset that she had been worried about it too. She was upset because I wasn't talking to her about it. She was upset because I'd promised her one life and given her another. "Can you tell me why you aren't confiding in me?" I turned my phone off. "Let's get some ice cream," I said. Yeah. So he has this terminal cancer. And, okay, I just want to, I might give some spoilers. So, one thing I found really interesting about this book is that it is an autobiography. He goes deep into his childhood, and he grew up in rural, I think it was Arizona, it might have been New Mexico, because his dad's a doctor, and he starts a practice there. And his mom is this really passionate woman, and she's really concerned about the education system where he's growing up in this small town, and she starts these reading programs, and she really is like pushing like reading on him. And not only him, but other kids in his school start reading more, and they go on to attend successful universities. And so he comes from this really inspiring background, and he's really passionate about reading. And then he goes on to medical school, and in medical school he writes about the grueling hours of medical school and grappling with his own consciousness in medical school. For example, in medical school, especially if you're going to be a surgeon, you have to practice like doing surgery, and you have to know a lot about the human body. And so I was kind of aware that, doctors see dead people, like they see cadavers. But I never thought about what it would be like to see dead people every day, and not like funeral home workers or funeral home directors where you like dress the corpse and stuff, but you have this whole body and you're dissecting it. And he writes about how sharp the scalpel is and how it's really like unzipping this body. Sorry to be gross. And how he just, sometimes people, when they're like dissecting these cadavers, they start to cry because they're like, this was like a human life, and now, I'm dissecting their body and like taking out parts of their organs and tissues, and we're analyzing them. And it was this very, very like profound experience for him. And there's this other anecdote where in medical school they visited this home. It's not like an institution, but it's just a home where these people live who had suffered like some type of brain injury. Most of the injuries were, I guess, from drowning. And these people, they can't function on their own. Sometimes some of them have very like erratic behaviors, and he felt like they were just keeping them in this place, and instead of having them be living with their families, but some of them ended up in this place because their families weren't able to take them on. And he kind of writes about, one of the doctors mentioned, like, in some cases it might have been better if like these people had died, and Paul like disagrees with that, and he's really grappling with that consciousness of what is a life and what it means to live, and what it means to live a good life, like as he's going through medical school. And then when he becomes a surgeon, he does like different practices, and he writes about these like really just like insane stories about people who were in these like accidents, or people who ended up in the hospital, and he's having to like help them. I mean, neurosurgery, you see some crazy stuff. Like this one man, one of the stories that stuck out to me, I don't know if the imagery is like too graphic, but it was this 20-year-old who got into a motorcycle accident, and his brain got like completely jumbled, and he's like, and this neurosurgeon Paul is having to like put parts of his brain back into this man's skull, and he eventually passes away. And you know, he's doing whatever he can to save him, but he realizes that at some point, like, you know, he's going to die because the injury is too severe. And even if he did, you know, help him survive, he doesn't know like if this man would want to live like that. And then there was another story where this man has this neurodegenerative disease, and it starts affecting like the speech part of his brain somehow, and the man can talk, but he'll say like 5, 65, 78, 78, 78, and I don't know. I mean, you have to be a neurosurgeon, I guess, to understand. And the man is trying to communicate, like he has feelings. For example, he might be saying like, I'm thirsty, like, can you get me water? Can you call someone for me? Like he's fully there. He hasn't like lost his mind, so to speak, but something happened or is happening where his feelings and what he wants to communicate, he's not able to verbalize it. And and this doctor, Paul, he writes about how he felt that was actually the most tragic of the diseases he saw, because it's almost like you're in like a prison and you're like trapped, and you can't like, you want to say something, but something's like, there's like a disconnect. And those were some of the most like tricky patients and tricky conditions to treat. And of course, he writes all about the intricacies of like, you know, if you make one tiny mistake, like let's say you're cutting out a tumor from someone's brain, and you know, and you make a mistake, like that can be the difference between life and death, the difference between like, you know, this patient hanging out and spending time with their loved ones and not like, and it just really like weighs on him. And it's like that's a difficult, very, very, very difficult job, not to mention like just grueling, like physically difficult. Like you were standing for like 12 or like 14 hours sometimes, just like stiff, right? And you have to have these like really, really precision movements. So it's just like fascinating to learn about this like whole other world, you know, like I'm not a surgeon. And then, you know, of course, like the book goes on and he starts writing about the cancer and like how that completely changes his life, and he has to stop doing the things he normally does. And it's really, really difficult on his ego. Like he wants to keep doing these things that he's really good at, but he's not able to do them anymore. And then, yeah, and he writes about aspects of his personal life, like how him and his wife were planning on starting a family, and how they, you know, they go about that when he's undergoing his cancer treatment. It's a really, really fascinating book. There's this one other excerpt that I wanted to read, and sometimes I like doggy ear a lot of these pages. Here we go. So when I don't want to make any spoilers, I guess, but I will say, like, he, you know, the cancer spreads, and he has to like grapple with all these different things. And he starts going to church with his wife. I don't know what denomination he is, but I myself am Catholic, and so this resonated with me. He said, I returned to the central values of Christianity: sacrifice, redemption, forgiveness, because I found them so compelling. There's a tension in the Bible between justice and mercy, between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And the New Testament says you can never be good enough. Goodness is the thing, you can never live up to it. The main message of Jesus, I believed, is that mercy trumps justice every time. Not only that, but maybe the basic message of original sin isn't feel guilty all the time. Maybe it is more along these lines. We all have a notion of what it means to be good, and we can't live up to it all the time. Maybe that's the message of what the message of the New Testament is, after all. Even if you have a notion as well defined as Leviticus, you can't live that way. It's just impossible. It's insane. So this was a really, really good find. I'm glad I chose it, and I hope that, yeah, I hope that you choose to read this book. I recommend 10 out of 10. Thanks for watching.